kleinere Dinge, die aber trotzdem helfen, dass unsere alten Anwendungen auch an die modernen...
Schön, dass Sie alle da sind. Mein Name ist Mirko Schremp, wer gestern Morgen noch nicht hier war. Ich werde noch mal ein paar kleine Sachen zur Orientierung sagen. Ich bin der Program Chair der BASTA, also der Gastgeber quasi für diese Woche. Und ich möchte Sie jetzt, bevor wir zur Keynote kommen, auf zwei Sachen hinweisen. Holen wir dazu auch gleich noch einen Kollegen auf die Bühne. Das eine ist nochmal der Hinweis auf die App, die Sie im Google Play Store oder im Apple Store finden. Dort finden Sie alle aktuellen Informationen zur BASTA, wenn wir Raumänderungen haben oder Ausfälle, was wir morgen tatsächlich auch noch haben werden wegen einem Krankheitsfall. Das wird alles daran angekündigt. Sie können in der App aber auch alle Sessions der Konferenz und die Konferenz überhaupt bewerten, auch Feedback abgeben dazu, wie Sie die Konferenz gerne hätten in Zukunft. Wir nehmen das sehr ernst und versuchen daraufhin auch irgendwie die nächste BASTAs, die nächsten BASTEN, wie auch immer es im Plural ist, so zu planen, dass es für Sie passt. Bitte nutzen Sie die App. Wenn Sie am Ende dann einen Barcode sehen, wenn Sie das Feedback abgegeben haben, können Sie vorne bei meinen Kolleginnen am Check-in auch ein Konferenz-T-Shirt bekommen. Dann möchte ich Sie noch mal darauf hinweisen, dass wir diese 3 wunderbaren Gewinnspiele haben. Das eine rechts außen ist unser Partnergewinnspiel. Da ist morgen Nachmittag 14 Uhr die große Verlosung. Es gibt wirklich tolle Preise zu gewinnen. Sprechen Sie einfach mit den Partnern bei uns in der Expo und nehmen Sie an dem Gewinnspiel teil. Schreiben Sie leserlich. Und das gilt auch für die beiden anderen Gewinnspiele. Ein Tutorial. Entwickler-Tutorials, das ist unsere Videolernplattform, und das andere, das ist wirklich ein interessantes Gewinnspiel, und dann wird es auch gleich gehen, das ist unser Entwickler-Kiosk, da können Sie einen Jahreszugang gewinnen, die Verlosung ist jeweils abends in der Expo Reception und morgen in der letzten Kaffeepause, auch da deutlich und leserlich schreiben. Wir haben jetzt schon 2 Tage hinter uns und wir haben einiges gehört über neue Dinge, und das möchten wir Ihnen jetzt auch gerade noch mal präsentieren. Auch Software und Support als Verlag hat was Neues gebaut, und das stellt jetzt Sebastian Mein, unser Verlagsleiter, Ihnen ganz kurz vor. Das ist unser neuer Entwicklerkiosk. Sebastian, kommst du bitte auf die Bühne? So.
Danke sehr. Ja, schönen guten Morgen. Guten Morgen, Basta. Schön, dass ihr da seid. Ich möchte ganz kurz hier die Gelegenheit nutzen, wie Mirko gerade gesagt hat, was Neues Ihnen anzukündigen. Und zwar, es geht um den eben schon erwähnten Entwickler-Kiosk. Ich denke, viele von euch kennen den Kiosk bereits. Wenn Sie zum Beispiel Abonnent des Windows Developer Magazins sind, dann ist ja der Kiosk quasi das digitale Archiv über die Ausgaben, also das elektronische digitale Archiv über die Ausgaben der vergangenen Jahre, wo Sie immer wieder recherchieren können, alle Ausgaben nachgucken können. Deswegen muss man nicht so große Papierstapel um sich herum irgendwie versammeln, falls man nochmal was nachgucken will. Was wir jetzt gemacht haben, ist Folgendes: Wir haben diesen Entwicklerkiosk radikal und grundlegend überarbeitet. Ja? Und zwar, erstens, wie ich schon sagte, es ist das digitale Archiv für Windows Developer Abonnenten. Zweitens, man kann den Entwicklerkiosk quasi auch global abonnieren und hat dann Zugriff auf sämtliche Beiträge sämtlicher Zeitschriften, die wir rausbringen, mit einer komfortablen Suche, und hat Zugriff, wie gesagt, auf dieses ganze Wissen von fast 10 Jahren Fachartikeln, die wir als Software Support Media publiziert haben. Das ist dann aus dem Java-Magazin, aus dem PHP-Magazin, aus dem Entwickler-Magazin, aus dem Business Technology-Magazin und vielem anderen mehr. JavaScript Compendium ist auch mit dabei. Was, glaube ich, gerade für Sie auch ein ganz besonders spannendes Angebot ist, weil natürlich auch eure Microsoft-Welt immer weiter sich irgendwie öffnet. Plötzlich wird auch über Docker geredet, über JavaScript und über ganz, ganz viele Themen, was vielleicht vor 8 Jahren oder sowas noch nicht in diesem Sinne irgendwie der Fall war. Das heißt also, der große Blick über den Tellerrand durch den globalen Zugang im Entwicklerkiosk. So sieht das Ganze aus. Erreichbar ist der Entwicklerkiosk unter kiosk.entwickler.de. Und neu ist jetzt einfach, dass die Semantik dieser praktisch 10.000 Artikel die da sind, nochmal deutlich überarbeitet wurde. Das heißt, die Suche, wenn Sie gezielt nach einem Stichwort suchen oder Kombination nach Stichworten etc., gibt es erheblich bessere Ergebnisse aus. Das ist das eine. Das zweite ist das, der bisherige Kiosk, wer schon Erfahrung hatte, der alte Kiosk sozusagen, ja, hat quasi als Suchergebnis immer eine Magazinausgabe gegeben. Das heißt, das war schon mal ganz gut, dann konnte ich in die Magazinausgabe reingehen und innerhalb der Magazinausgabe dann mir nochmal den passenden Artikel suchen. Jetzt ist alles auf einzelnen Artikeln basiert. Das heißt, jeder einzelne Artikel hat seine semantische Auszeichnung, ist natürlich nochmal deutliche Verbesserung für die Suchergebnisse. Und wir gehen davon aus, und viele Tests haben das auch schon bewiesen und Feedbacks, das wir bekommen haben, die Ergebnisse, die Sie erhalten bei einer Suche, sind natürlich deutlich relevanter für Ihre Recherche. Last but not least gibt es noch weitere Geschichten, zum Beispiel, Sie können sich Ihre eigenen Sammlungen erstellen, können sagen, ich habe hier eine Recherche zu, keine Ahnung, Docker auf Azure gemacht, ja, kann da die Artikel mit zusammenstellen und in dem nächsten Release, relativ bald, kann ich das auch mit den Kollegen im Unternehmen zum Beispiel auch sharen, wenn die auch einen entsprechenden Zugang haben. Dann gibt es weitere Möglichkeiten, zum Beispiel eigene Notizen erstellen und last but not least ist das Ganze natürlich heutzutage Cloud-basiert, das heißt, Sie können es über Browser ganz normal besuchen, aber auch natürlich über native Apps, iPhone, iPad einerseits und Android-Welt andererseits. Zugänglich ist das Ganze, erstens natürlich immer eine klassische Einzellizenz, kann man reingehen, kann man sich einfach registrieren, ist ja klar, kostet eine gewisse Monatsgebühr. Es gibt Teamlizenzen, das heißt, da ist eine gewisse Rabattstaffel drin. Ganz besonders spannend, aber für ganze Firmen, darauf will ich hinweisen, und sozusagen große Teams, ist eben die Möglichkeit zu sagen, ich möchte einen gesamten Domainzugang. Das heißt, also sozusagen alle Personen, die sich mit einer @xy.com Domain sozusagen anmelden, haben direkten Zugang und können auf das gesamte Archiv zugreifen. Genauso gut kann ein Unternehmen auch wiederum entscheiden, sagen, ja, ich möchte alle Kollegen, die über eine gewisse IP-Adresse zugreifen, möchte ich einfach freien Zugang geben. Falls ihr das interessant findet, falls ihr glaubt, okay, diese Wissensdatenbank mit 10.000 Beiträgen ist was Gutes und das wäre klasse, das in einem Team, keine Ahnung, ob ein kleines Team von 5 Leuten oder ein großes Team von über 100 Leuten, whatever, zu sharen, gehen Sie zu uns, ein Entwickler-Kiosk-Stand da vorne, erkunden sich nach Preisen, nach Möglichkeiten, gerade für diese Domain- und IP-Freigabe. Wir glauben, das ist eine spannende Sache. Wir erleben da ziemlich viel Zulauf und ziemlich viel positives Feedback. Gucken Sie es an. Und last but not least natürlich, jeder kann sich einfach mal einen Gratis-Monat holen, kann sich das ein bisschen angucken, ein bisschen rumstöbern. Wir glauben, das ist ein spannendes Angebot. Wie gesagt, wir haben einen ganz tollen Zulauf und unter kioskentwickler.de können Sie sich das irgendwie angucken. Seien Sie herzlich eingeladen. Das war's von meiner Seite aus. Jetzt will ich nicht länger der KEYNOTE im Weg stehen und gebe das Wort wieder zurück an Mirko. Vielen Dank.
Ja, und wir haben auch gleich einen praktischen Anwendungsfall für den Kiosk, für Sie ab nächster Woche. Sie haben das schon vorne bei den Kollegen beim Check-in bekommen. Wenn nicht, sagen Sie nochmal Bescheid. Sie haben so ein Blatt, so ein DIN A4-Papier, das ist eine Anleitung, wie Sie in dem Kiosk ab dem 4.10. Zugreifen können auf die Slides dieser Konferenz, die Ihnen die Sprecher zur Verfügung stellen. Und soweit das geht, haben wir alle Slides. Manchmal gibt es auch Sessions, da ist einfach so viel Code, dass es nicht sinnvoll wäre, irgendeinen Slide zu präsentieren, oder es gibt gar keinen, oder es gibt auch Restriktionen. Aber weitgehend sind alle Slides vorhanden. Nutzen Sie die, wenn Sie zurück sind in Ihren Unternehmen. Sprechen Sie mit Ihren Kollegen darüber. Nutzen Sie die Slides als einfach als Erinnerungshilfe, um mit Ihren Kollegen über das zu sprechen, was Sie diese Woche auf der Basta gehört haben. Und das ist ja ziemlich viel. Wie gesagt, das ist eine Anleitung. Was hier nicht zu sehen ist, ist der Code, den Sie eingeben müssen. Dazu gehen Sie eben einfach auf kiosk.entwickler.de, registrieren sich kostenlos, wenn Sie noch nicht Abonnent sind und sowieso einen Zugang haben. Und dann haben Sie Zugriff auf die Slides der Basta ab dem 4.10. Genau. And now I switch to English because our next guest and speaker here on the stage is speaking English, and I would like to prepare you for that, and so that she understands what I'm talking about her. It's Julie Lerman, and as I mentioned yesterday in the introduction, and then we had a keynote about .NET Core 3 and .NET 5 and Windows 10, and I said, yeah, next year everything will be different because there's only one Windows 10, and there's only one .NET 5. That's a bright future. And from that moment on, every software is legacy software. And what does really mean? What that really means is something Julie will now tell us. So please, Julie, come on stage.
Thank you so much. So it's my first time here in Mainz, and did I say it right? I actually learned on my way here a new lesson, that it is a lot easier to have Frankfurt Airport as a final destination than to make a connection through it, which is all I've ever done in so many years. I've already had schnitzel, sampled the local Riesling, and got to see the Rhine River when I woke up this morning, which is pretty nice. So, living with your legacy. Yesterday, I had a little fun on Twitter. I spent a lot of time on Twitter. I put a little Twitter poll that said, okay, .NET Core 3 just got released 2 days ago. I'm doing a keynote at a .NET conference. What do you think I'm going to be talking about? .NET Core 3? Entity Framework Core 3? Or 20-year-old technology, VB6 and FoxPro 2.6? And I was surprised that people have been paying attention, and most of the people took a wild guess that I was going to be talking about something legacy, which is what I'm going to talk about. So, yeah, legacy apps. We love to hate them, right? We love to complain about them. And especially here we are, as Mirko said, .NET Core 3 just got released, C# 8, Entity Framework Core 3. There's plenty of sessions about those topics at this conference yesterday, and the workshops, and still upcoming. And also, there's sessions on what to do with legacy apps, right? Like replacing them with microservices, or how to use the strangler pattern, or how to refactor them. So there's a lot of talk about that. But what we don't talk about enough is dealing with the legacy apps, living with those apps that we have to work with day in and day out. So there's probably a lot of people here who, after this conference and seeing all this new stuff, you're going to go back to work and you're going to have to work on, not .NET Core 3, right? You're going to be working on something old. And you might be feeling unhappy about that. Like, I want to work on the new stuff, right? And I feel that way a lot when I have to work with my older software. But there's also, it's such important stuff to be able to do, to keep working, to be maintaining, but also it can be rewarding as well. And what I really want to do is leave you today with hopefully a better feeling than ugh legacy apps, like that you can really take pride in the work that you're doing on them. So I want to, give you, make sure that you have a good perspective on them. And also I think it's really important, even as we live with these legacy apps and work on them, to always be thinking about the future of them and have strategies for making sure that there is an out for them, that they won't be always around. So because it's morning, I thought maybe everybody needed their exercise. I promise no jumping jacks. But I want to get a gauge of, and there's so many people in this room, but get a gauge of what people are working on with respect to software that's not brand new. So if everybody who is working on something that is at least a year old could stand up, that would be, I'm sure. Okay, so now you have brothers and sisters in arms here, okay? So, no, stay standing, stay standing. If your app is at least 5 years old, stay standing. Everybody else sit down. At least 5 years old, stay standing. Oh, okay. All right, so does it make you feel better to know that you're not alone here? There's a few other people that are working on software that's older than 5 years old. Okay, stay standing if you're working on something that's more than 10 years old. Whoa. Wow, right? Look around the room and see this. There are a lot of people here. I would say maybe 20% of the room are still standing at 10 plus years. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, everybody's sitting down. Okay, it's the rest of us. Me and about 30 others working on software that's 20 years old. And then I just want to add one last thing to it. if you wrote this software that you're still supporting that's over 20 years old, go ahead and stay standing. Everybody else sit down. Who's left besides me? Okay. Everybody who's 50 and up, right? That would be me. All right, you can rest now. But that's pretty interesting. I was wondering if I would be the only person left standing, because I too am working on software that I wrote over 20 years ago, right? Before we had the internet, before we had all the great resources that we had. And I wrote it all by myself back in the day when the technology was so much smaller. There wasn't so many complicated areas of expertise. You really need a team today to do all that stuff. So yeah, so I'm supporting this old software, and if anybody follows me on Twitter, you might have seen a few tweets every once in a while. This is just a small, you don't have to read them, this is just a small number, and I'll tell you, each one of these is a response to me when I'm in the middle of working on something cool and new, like learning about Azure DevOps or durable functions, or seeing the new features of Entity Framework Core, and then my client calls and they're like, oh, we wrote a new feature in the software, or worse yet, something broke. Like, I haven't touched that area of the software in 8 years. Like, how did it just break, right? So the first thing I have to do is get the rant out of my system. And my client's not on Twitter, though. Maybe they are, but they know. I love them. I have a very close relationship with them. So I get it out of my system, right? And then I roll up my sleeves and get to work. And part of that trepidation is, I'm working on something really fun and challenging, and I'm learning and figuring things out, and now I have to go work in the old stuff. But once I get back into the old stuff, and I'm kind of doing the same thing, especially if it's some part of the application I wrote 15 years ago. I have no idea what it does. I left no help for future me. Who knew that this software would still be working and running the company all these years later? I did not leave myself any help. So especially, if it's a bug that just appeared from out of the blue, that's pretty hard to figure out. Or if I need to add some functionality, I have to really make sure about where potential side effects are, right? Because I don't know. I don't have tests, right? And the code is all over the place. Hopefully, you don't inherit messes like that. But it wasn't a mess when I wrote it, right? We didn't have our modern software practices. I was just getting it done by hook or by crook. I was self-taught programmer. So yeah, that's just having to work in that stuff. It does kind of break my heart sometimes, just, again, as I'm getting into it. But once I get in there, it's a lot of the same satisfaction and challenge of learning and solving a problem, right? I remember even thinking that when I was working in FoxPro, I was adding a new big feature that was impossible, and I figured it out, right? And it was fun. And I was like, oh, God, I'm having fun working in FoxPro. 2.6 I'm talking about. At least it's Windows, not DOS. So I think it's important to define legacy, right? We have lots of different ways of describing it, such as, something that you deployed yesterday, like driving a car. You buy a new car, drive it out of a lot. It's a used car now, worth half of its value. So there's a lot of different ways of defining legacy. So I don't think of my 20-plus-year-old apps as the legacy I'm going to leave behind. This is a legacy, right? The Taj Mahal is a legacy. My mom was an author. She wrote 8 books. Her very first book was actually put up for a Pulitzer Prize, if you can imagine. She was 30 years old. A baby, from my perspective now. She wrote 8 books, right? Okay, I wrote some books, but I don't think my books are my legacy because they're now doorstops, right? They're about Entity Framework, first and second versions of Entity Framework, which are no longer really viable. Hopefully nobody's still using those few versions. Not all tech books become outdated, though. Like, here's 2 examples. Michael Feathers working effectively with legacy code. Legacy, it's all about legacy software. And Eric Evans' Domain-Driven Design. Those books are 15 years old, right? But those books are definitely, for Michael and for Eric, those are definitely a legacy for both of those men. But they're not about a specific technology. They're guidance, right? They're a very different perspective of information. So my books, I don't feel they're a legacy because, again, that they're just like, they're outdated already, which is why, if you're wondering if I'm ever going to write another book, probably not. So in Michael's book, all about dealing with legacy code, he wrote that book in 2004, and he defined legacy as code without tests, right? And today he says, I didn't really mean for that definition to be future-proof. I didn't, at the time, that's really what made sense, that it was code without tests. And I look at my code, and there are no tests, and that definitely makes things pretty difficult for me to go in and do tweaks on it. But Michael's gotten more involved in thinking about ideas around socio-technical aspects of software development, how teams affect architecture and relationships and things like that. So it's just not all about the code. And today he says that he thinks of legacy code is when the team turns over faster than the code, right? So that's an interesting perspective. Of course, going back to my particular experience, I'm the team and I haven't turned over. That doesn't happen to describe my legacy code. But when you're working on software in a company where the teams do change and evolve, then that makes a lot of sense. Andrea Goulet and Scott Ford from Corgi Bytes, they define it from an archaeological perspective. They say the legacy code is artifacts without communication. So tests are a specific form of communication, but maybe code comments, right, which everybody has their opinions about, but still code comments are a form of communication documentation, right? So code that doesn't have all of that communication for the future people working on it. That's what they think of as legacy code. And Andrea and Scott have, I don't know if you're familiar with this, they have a podcast called Legacy Code Rocks, which I highly recommend for anybody working on software older than a year old, which is almost all of you now that we know. And they release them pretty frequently with some of really the great minds in our industry. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. And it's not all about, rah, legacy code's great. It's about how to deal with legacy code and how to think about it, how to deal with technical debt, things like that. So dictionary.com term for legacy system is that it's a way of describing software or a system that's outdated and really hard to replace because it's being used all over the place, right? That also is a pretty good definition. And going back to my personal experience with that, the wide use is just within one company. But these 2 applications, they are so important to the workflow and to the company. One is their very highly customized way of doing invoicing, right? They can't live without that, and they haven't found a replacement for that yet. As a matter of fact, they hired some guy to write a new version of that about 8 years ago. He said, it'll take 2 months, and I'm just going to charge you a flat fee. 2 years later, he got it done, and they've never used it. They're still using my app. Right, so that is another pretty good description of a legacy system. So Eric Evans, also somebody who I respect a lot, he was keynoting at Explore DDD, Domain-Driven Design Conference in Colorado last week. And he said something that I've heard him say before, is that we don't honor legacy systems enough. Like, they're really, really important. And we really need to do that. And we need to honor our own involvement with them instead of, what we all really like to do is just make fun of legacy systems. And if you haven't seen this, it's worth watching. Sorry, I created it without the sound, right? I'm just going to make a quick fix to this legacy software, right? I could spend the entire session here, this entire keynote, just showing you funny tweets about legacy systems. It's very tempting, but I'll just leave you with that one. So it's really easy to make fun of legacy systems, right? We don't honor them enough. So there was a thread about, you know, why do we feel so bad about our legacy code, and this is again on Twitter. I spend a lot of time on Twitter, and I learn and interact with so many people there. So these people were talking about how they refer to their legacy code, and one person said, well, I call it legendary code, right? Another said they call it classic code, vintage code, heritage code. I like those. But here is the probably most commonly used way of expressing how people feel about their legacy code. It's their moneymaker, right? I mean, legacy code, these old systems that you're supporting, the 5-year-old systems and the 10 and 20-year-old systems that you're supporting are running businesses. They're running, airlines are running on this old stuff, right? Banks and healthcare systems and government, and oh, it's kind of scary, right? But they're really running enormous businesses and industries, making companies a lot of money. And if you're maintaining them, whether you're in the company that's benefiting directly from the application or you're supporting it for somebody else, that is a pretty good source of income. So this came by my radar recently, or earlier this month. COBOL is 60 years old. 60 years old. And what Grady Booch highlighted out of that article is that there are 200 billion lines of COBOL code still in use today of a 60-year-old app, right? But more interestingly, from the perspective of somebody with so much admiration and experience in our industry, what he says about that is, old software doesn't die. You have to kill it. It doesn't just go away. And this is what's happened with my client, I'm sure, with these old systems that you are supporting. They still work, right? And I tell my client, I can't keep doing this all the time because, I'm flying to Germany for a week, right? Like, what if something happens? What are you going to do? But it's still running the company. And it's so hard for somebody to consider the idea of how much it would cost to replace that system or to refactor it, right? Even if you do, have this long-term plan, little by little, refactor and replace. It's like, why would we spend that money? Just spend a little money every once in a while doing maintenance on it. We should be good. That's what happens because it is really scary to think about replacing it, whether it's, the amount of time it would take. And, you've got a huge system. It's going to take, what, will it take a year? Will it take 2 years to rewrite? Guess what? It's legacy again, right? At least it's not 30 years old, right? So that's how that happens. That's why they don't just die on their own. And believe me, I wish, mine would sometime. And it will. But we're making a plan for it, right? Finally. So I also want to address some statements, some ideas that maybe somebody has said to you or you have felt yourself about working on the legacy applications. I should be working on the latest technology, like .NET Core 3, not VB6, right? I should be solving new problems, not working on a problem that got solved already, and I'm not doing anything interesting with it. But the one that pains me the most, and sometimes people say this to me, but more often I say it to myself, I feel really irresponsible letting it get this way. I mean, hasn't been my decision in the long run, it's the client's decision, right? I've definitely encouraged them to, find a path to moving away from this old software. But I still feel like it's my responsibility and that I've left them in a vulnerable position. So I just want to address these a little more, one at a time. So I should be using the latest technology. Well, there's two perspectives of that. One is you want to for your own career, right? It's your career growth. But you're all here at a conference, whether you brought yourself here or your company supported you in taking time off to learn things. So that's not advice I need to give to you. You're already here learning new things, whether or not you get to use them in the workplace, right? You might learn all this new stuff and then go back and work on the old apps, right? Because that's what our jobs are. And then it's hard, right? How am I going to get expert in these new technologies if I'm not using it day by day? So I've actually talked at another conference by the Basta people, a different conference, about the fact that you don't have to become expert in all of these new technologies in order to have some understanding of it. Just kind of, at least be aware of what's out there, even if you don't have the time to sit down and write apps and explore, because not everybody has the time for that. But the other side of, should be working in new tech is the problem of supporting the old technology. So one of the things I do with these old apps is I have virtual machines that have the development environment on them. I actually was using a Windows XP virtual machine up until 2 years ago because, especially for VB6, we kept being told it wasn't supported. The IDE wasn't supported beyond Windows XP. And one day I was like, that's it. I'm going to try to see if I can get it at least onto Windows 7. I'm curious if it'll run on there. And VB6 ran on there, and so then I rebuilt the development environment on there, and it worked. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to update it to Windows 8. And you get a message that says, you can update to Windows 8, but you're going to lose all of the software that you've installed. So I just left it at Windows 7. But having it in the virtual machine really makes it possible to keep working on it. So my regular machine, I can keep updating it. I don't have to worry about side effects of, some DLL in Windows changing and screwing things up in my development environment. And it is, it is a little fragile, right? Not only am I using VB6 and FoxPro. FoxPro is a 16-bit application. 16-bit. So, but I'm also using lots of third-party tools with a VB6 application. So not only do I have to keep those around, the old CDs, nothing's on floppy disk, it's not that bad. I keep those around. I also have instructions of how to recreate the development environment, because, all the different third-party tools and kind of tricks and things like that I have to do. I see some, yeah. I have to print it out to do it. So it's nice. I can take that the VM, it's safe, right? And I can put it on a laptop if I need to, if I'm going somewhere and I'm in the middle of something with that client and I have to keep working on it. I sat on my mother-in-law's couch at Christmas time working, in parallels on my MacBook Pro, working on FoxPro 2.6 because it was in a virtual machine, right? So I was able to do that. And also, this only occurred to me a few years ago, right? VB6 and FoxPro, we didn't have source control back then, right? Source control was a backup. That was it. And another backup and another backup. So we didn't have source control. And those tools certainly aren't built into those platforms. And I finally went, duh, I can still, use other source control tools. So you can use that with anything. It doesn't have to be Node and C#, right? It doesn't have to be coming out of Visual Studio 2017 and its extensions. So I now have those applications up on repositories, private repositories, right? And I can use the Git command line or a user interface to, make sure all of that happens. So that makes me feel a lot more comfortable, right? Because, tweaking the software is such a tricky and dangerous thing, so I don't have to like back up, depend on backups, and then figure out what it was that I changed and replace it if things just go totally awry. So it was just funny. It took me all that time to go, oh, duh, I can still use that. So one thing I don't have to worry about is installing the software on the users' machines around the company. Thank goodness. We originally, back with Windows 98, remember Windows 98? Every time something went wrong, the answer was reinstall Windows 98. So back in the days of Windows 98 and Windows XP, we could have all these automated ways of updating the software, especially if there's DLLs that need to get registered in the registry. But then, as we moved on to Vista, remember Vista, and Windows 7, et cetera, the security changed a lot. And those didn't work anymore. We could not find a workaround. And so, the infrequent times that we have to update a DLL, the guy in charge of admin, he just goes around and he does the updates manually, right? Maybe if it was a bigger company, we'd find a better way. Everybody's like, oh, install it on Docker. It doesn't work that way. Another tip is I've got some very old dog-eared books in my office still, and I am pulling them out when I have to work on this stuff, because I don't remember how to code in VB6. I don't remember commands and syntax for Fox Pro. I don't want to have to remember, but I do have to figure that out. And a lot of that stuff, you're not going to find it on Google, or by way of Google, or Bing or whatever. So just some tricks for keeping that old technology alive. And I can't talk about putting this stuff on GitHub without sharing with you what I did when I first put these on there. So it's a private repository. My client has access to it, and I put a README in there that says, if you're looking at this and you're not me, then I might have died. But if you're looking at this and I'm alive, I'm going to die of embarrassment anyway, so it's all the same. So yay. So should be solving new problems, right? Sometimes problems don't change. That's why the software is still working, right? It's still solving the business problems. It's nice when businesses do evolve, but their core domain doesn't change. Their core problems don't change. And I like this example of the bell tower in the cathedral in Mechelen. I've actually been there, although this is a picture from Wikipedia because it's way better than anything I could have ever taken. Right? This is 300 years old. 300, 200 years old, many hundreds of years old. And it still, runs the clock, it still rings the bells. They just need to maintain it and polish it up and, make sure the gears don't rust out and things like that, right? That domain, that problem is not changing. So they don't have to go, oh, we need to have a whole new electronic system to ring the bells and run the clock, because this works. And that is a legacy, right? I'm pointing at my screen. I mean to go, that is a legacy. I'm pointing at the screen I'm looking at. So the last one, and the most difficult, of course, is this feeling of being irresponsible, or the accusation that you're being responsible for not replacing the software. And again, whose choice really is that, right? In my case, it's the client that, even though I've encouraged it over the years, that they're still, using this stuff, but I still feel very personally responsible for that. And here's the biggest problem. I mentioned before, I'm flying to Germany, going to be at a conference next week, while you're doing your bi-monthly billing on the old Fox Pro system that every once in a while has just a little glitch if the, I don't know, the network, has a hiccup or something like that. I'm so afraid. I've told them I am afraid to leave my house, right? But the big one is, what if I get hit by a car, right? And it's not just me as a solo person being responsible entirely for an application. You could be on a team where, there's somebody on that team who is like the repository, who's been on that project for 15 years and really knows everything, and nobody else really understands. Right? And that's a dangerous position. In my case, it's a hard one to solve. because the same admin, he's also a programmer at the client, he said, I could learn VB6 if you need me to. And I was like, don't waste your time. Like, do not do that. Like, I don't want you to learn VB6. Like, we will find an exit path for this, I promise, right? But that knowledge needs to be shared. So I think that's really important. I showed this little graphic on Twitter the other day, and a bunch of friends were like, "Whoa, what?" So it's just a joke. It's okay. So the other really big thing is technical debt, right? The longer you let this software that doesn't work too well and you got some Band-Aids and things on it, the longer you let it go, the worse it's going to get. And it's a metaphor for financial debt, right? So this is from the Legacy Code Rocks podcast, one of them, with Tim Doherty. And he said, I will read these to you because this is what the important points. He said, tech debt never goes away. It's like financial debt for a business. You're always going to incur some level of debt. But as long as you can manage it responsibly, it's not a bad thing. And that he thinks that's really the biggest cultural shift that's already taken root, that understanding that as long as you can manage it, it's not a terrible thing. But his really interesting idea is that we need to operationalize that. We need to add that to DevOps. We need to find better ways of supporting our legacy code. Michael Feathers had a blog post asking, is technical debt just a metaphor that doesn't work? And he says, like most good metaphors, it's more than a metaphor because it's an accurate read of dynamics in a system, right? Our technical debt. How many people here are familiar with Accelerate, like the big DevOps survey? Wow, I've been at, if you go to like an Agile conference, everybody would be raising their hand. This is really important work. They just released an update to it. It's a huge survey done by Jess Humble and Nicole Ferguson, and Jean Kim. I'm mostly familiar with Nicole and Jess, about the state of DevOps and how people are adopting it and how teams are doing related to the practices that they're using. It's a really, really important book. I would, they published, it's a PDF you can download for free, but they also published it as a book to just make it more accessible. And I think it's a more important read even than, what's the novel about the totally, the horrible story about the IT novel. Say it again? The Phoenix Project, yeah. That book was too much for me. I didn't get very far through it. So you're familiar with the Phoenix Project? Wow. Okay, so I'm going to have to do a blog post with references from this talk. So anyway, with respect to technical debt, they were saying that for productivity, they found that organizations can improve productivity by investing in easy-to-use tools, some socio-technical impact also with implementing a culture of psychological safety, but a really important piece of that was reducing technical debt, right? It improved, they found from all the research they did in the surveys that improved productivity, and it makes everybody happier, right? So one way, of course, to get rid of technical debt and to modernize your application without just complete replacement is by refactoring it. So refactoring is really, really important. But what do you refactor, right? If you've got hundreds of thousands of lines of code, what do you refactor? And my approach to that is refactor what you have to touch. Why refactor something that is not having, nobody's working on it, we don't need to interact with it, right? So refactor stuff that you touch. Every time I go in, I try to leave it a better place, right? I tend my garden, as people like to use that metaphor. So because if I'm working on it, then there's a chance that I may have to go work on it again, and I want to make it easier. I made a big investment trying to re-understand what was going on in there. So if I can refactor it, deleting code, that's my favorite thing to do, being able to delete code, redundant code, things like that. So I mean, that's my personal recommendation, is to refactor code you have to touch. Nick Toon, who's an architect I respect enormously. When he was at Craft Conference earlier this year, he was talking about the Eric Evans' DDD book, Secrets of the Big Blue Book. And when he was talking about anti-corruption layers, which is something that we can put in between, like if we need to interact with old code, rather than going in and modifying the old code, you leave the old code, you put in an anti-corruption layer, and then you can write new code to connect with it so that you can use modern things. So that is a really, really good pattern to do, although it definitely can be overused. But the other thing he's experienced with a lot of success is to go up and go clean up that legacy code, go refactor, and then build new stuff on top of it. Accelerate also with respect to refactoring, again, being able to refactor and make investments in the maintainability of code. That also applies to writing new code, right, to make sure it's maintainable. That goes back to reducing technical debt and making the team happier, making yourselves happier about working with this legacy code. Another thing, if we refer to legacy code as code without tests, right? And believe me, I really worry about this when I have to go in and work on these old systems. What is going to break when I make a change here? Because there's so much that's connected. Changing how the data is stored could break something somewhere else in the system. I don't have tests in place to deal with that. Changing how a procedure works could impact something else in the system. And I'm not using Visual Studio, right? I'm using Visual Basic, VB6, or Fox Pro. There aren't tools in there to say, find all of the code in the whole system or solution or project that is using this or making a reference to that. So the idea of you should just go add tests to the old code, that's really, really hard, because what we call side effects, right? Like, we want to prevent the side effects. That's what the tests are for, so that you make sure if you make a change in one place that everything's still working, right? But they're side effects because you don't know where they're going to be, right? So when I look at that, I'm like, there are tools for adding testing to VB6, believe it or not. And I've looked at them and I've thought, yeah, but where am I going to add the tests? I don't know what I'm trying to protect. Right? Because it's such a vast code base, I don't know where I would add the test. If I'm making a change to something, where else is it going to get affected? So that is a really tricky one. So for all of you building new software, please add tests. And I don't mean 100% code coverage. I mean, for the stuff that matters. So with the release of .NET Core 3 and the fact that WinForms and WPF and Entity Framework 6, does everybody know that? You can use Entity Framework 6 on .NET Core 3 on a Mac. I've done it on a MacBook in Visual Studio Code. It was amazing. But that also means that our WinForms app and our WPF apps, their life is now getting extended, right? Because .NET Core 3 has a long future ahead of it. So, we need to even think about those old apps and being able to maintain those in the future. So that's actually, a good tie back to the fact that .NET Core 3 just got released. So just a couple of things I want to wrap up with. I've gotten some unsolicited advice over the years, because I do rant on Twitter about this, and people want to. I just want to rant, right? I just want to get it off my chest and go back to work. But everybody wants to be helpful. So some people tell me, well, just drop the client, and I just want to say, WTF? How could you ever do that to anybody? I'm not going to work on it anymore. You might as well just shut down your business, because you're not going to have way to deal with problems anymore. Like, I would never do that. I've worked really hard to help them find a path forward. So another one is, oh, just rewrite it. And believe me, there are days I look and I'm like, I'm just going to start. They'll be happy to have me do it. But just rewriting it is not such an easy solution. Their business has changed, right? But more importantly, I do not want to be the sole person responsible for an application again, right? It needs to be a team. It needs to be a company that's going to be around so that, when somebody flies off to Germany, there's still people to support it. When somebody leaves, there's other people, all the IP stays within the company. Some have suggested I port it to VB.NET or C# if there's such a thing. That really doesn't make sense either. Again, you're not going to take advantage of modern software practices or changes in the business, changes in their workflow and their needs. And then, of course, just hire us to rewrite it. Like, I care about this client deeply and be very careful who I let work on their software. But there is light at the end of the tunnel for these guys. We really do have some of the other old apps, my WPF app and one of the WinForms app and the old ASP.NET 1.0 app. They've finally been, they're replaced. And we're starting to evolve the systems underneath. The two big, the VB6 and the FoxPro app, we're actually starting in the sales department. I never worked with a sales department before, but it actually makes sense. That's where everything starts, and where the contracts are made, and where the prices and plans are made. So that's actually going to be Dynamics 365, which is amazing because we brought somebody else in and they had that idea. Because I would have just said, custom software, let's solve the problem, let's look at the domain, right? And they looked at this and said, yeah, 20 years ago when you wrote this, there was nothing out there like it, right? You had a unique problem to solve. Custom software made sense. But now we can see a lot of this business process is really common. And you might as well use software that, anybody, like if you do it in Dynamics, there's thousands of people who can work on this now, right? Instead of just a code base that nobody understands. So that was a really interesting thing. So what I want to leave you with, as you go forth and learn new things today, and then realize you have to go back and work on old things, that working on legacy code doesn't have to suck. It doesn't have to be a career killer. As you saw when everybody was standing up, it's what most of us really do in our works. So, embrace it, improve it every chance you get, right? And make plans for the future of that software so it doesn't get stuck. And so we don't feel stuck and go, oh God, we have to go work on the legacy code again. So that is it. Thank you so much. And I really do hope that when you go back to work and working on your old apps, that you have a renewed energy and interest and respect for the apps and for your work. Thank you.
Ganz anderes Niveau an Automatisierung erreichen. Hunderte Datenbankserver, hunderte Datenbankcluster verwalten und betreiben ohne Administrator heutzutage in der Cloud überhaupt kein Thema mehr.
No matter what you pick, the technology stack should really depend on your skills and what you want to do going forward.
Keine neuen Steuerelemente. Es sind kleinere Dinge, die aber trotzdem helfen, dass unsere alten Anwendungen auch an die moderne Zeit besser angepasst sind.